You ever wonder what really pushes a person over the edge? I'm not talking about petty frustration or short tempers. We've all been there. I'm talking about the kind of deep, simmering jealousy that eats a person from the inside out, the kind that builds day after day until finally, snap. Someone does something so irreversible, so unthinkable, it sends shockwaves through an entire community. This story? It starts right there, with one man left out of a simple Easter Sunday celebration, spiraling into darkness. And I know what you're thinking. How could something as harmless as a holiday lead to something as tragic as a double murder? Well, that's the mystery we're going to solve together today. And trust me, by the end of the story, you're going to understand everything. Why it happened, how it happened, and maybe even how it could have been stopped. But before we get too deep into the timeline, I want to talk to you for a second. Yes, you, the one watching this right now. You're here because that title grabbed you, right? Because something about a jealous stepfather committing double murder felt too twisted, too real, too possible to scroll past. Maybe it's because you know someone who could snap like that. Maybe it's because you've felt that kind of anger before. Or maybe you're just fascinated by how darkness hides in plain sight, inside homes that seem normal, inside families that look picture-perfect from the outside. Either way, you're here, and you're not going to want to miss a second of this story. This isn't just another crime headline. This is a layered, psychological spiral into obsession, rejection, and the kind of misplaced love that turns deadly. So, let's pull back the curtain. The story begins in the quiet suburb of Franklin, Tennessee, a place where American flags flap on front porches, where the lawns are cut just right, and where Easter Sunday means pastel dresses, egg hunts in the backyard, and family brunch with too much ham. It's the kind of neighborhood where neighbors wave whether they know you or not. But behind the trimmed hedges and Instagram-worthy family portraits, secrets fester. And at the center of this one was a man named Brad Whitaker, a 42-year-old former construction foreman who looked more like your average dad at a Little League game than someone capable of murder. But looks, like we'll see, can be dangerously misleading. Brad wasn't just anyone. He was the ex-husband of Jessica Marin, mother of two, local elementary school volunteer, and the kind of woman whose laugh made people turn around in the grocery store. Jessica and Brad had divorced 3 years prior. It wasn't messy, not publicly at least. They said it was mutual. Irreconcilable differences. The usual script. But people close to them whispered about control issues. About jealousy. About how Brad didn't quite let go, even after the papers were signed. Jessica moved on. She had to, for her own peace of mind, for her daughter Mia, and for the son she shared with Brad. She started seeing someone new, and when Easter Sunday rolled around that year, she wanted it to be just about the kids and her new beginning. A soft, fresh start. She didn't invite Brad. And that, according to the police reports, according to the neighbors, according to the shattered remains of what once was a peaceful family, is where the story took its first dark turn. Now, I know what you're feeling. Why would a grown man react so violently to being left out of an Easter celebration? But that's exactly what we're going to unpack here. You see, Brad wasn't just jealous. He was obsessed. With control. With appearances. With the idea that he was supposed to be the center of Jessica's world, even after she had moved on. And when he saw those happy Instagram posts of Jessica and her new partner laughing with the kids in matching bunny ears, something snapped. But we'll get to that. What I want you to understand right now is that this story isn't just about murder. It's about emotional manipulation. It's about the dangerous side of ego. It's about how toxic masculinity, left unchecked, can twist a man's identity until all he sees is betrayal where there is none. And most of all, it's about how trauma can be passed on like a virus from one person to the next if we don't stop it in its tracks. These aren't strangers. These are people who could live next door to you. These are the kinds of relationships that start off loving and slowly, almost imperceptibly, turn toxic. Jessica was trying to protect her peace. And in doing so, she unknowingly triggered the one man who couldn't bear to be excluded. She had no idea what was coming. No one did. And that's why this story matters. Because it reminds us that danger doesn't always wear a mask or creep in through windows at night. Sometimes, it's already inside the house. It's the person who still knows your garage code. The one who still has a key, still shows up with gifts for the kids. The one who says, "I'm fine" when they're anything but. That's what makes this story so real, so chilling, and so important. So stay with me, because every single detail matters. Over the next hour, we're going to walk through the timeline of events. You'll hear from people who knew Brad, from Jessica's friends, from law enforcement officers who say they've never seen a man so calm after doing something so monstrous. We're going to go through text messages, voicemails, social media posts, everything that paints a picture of how this tragedy unfolded. And as we peel back each layer, I promise you, you're going to get the answer you came here for. You're going to see how one man's spiral into jealousy turned a holiday into a horror story. And you're going to understand why this could happen again if we don't pay attention to the warning signs hiding in plain sight. But before we dive deeper into the events of that fateful day, let me introduce the key people whose lives will forever be marked by what happened. There's Jessica, of course, the mother, the partner, the woman who tried to rebuild her life with grace. There's her daughter Mia, 10 years old, bright as a sunrise and always the first to run for the Easter eggs. There's Jason, Jessica's new boyfriend, a software engineer from Ohio, who'd been dating her for just under a year and was finally starting to feel like part of the family. And finally, there's Brad, the stepfather, the outsider, the man who felt everything slipping away and decided, in one irreversible moment, that if he couldn't be part of their happiness, he'd destroy it. Now here's where the mystery kicks in. You might think you know what happened already. But what if I told you that Brad was seen at a gas station 2 towns away just 1 hour before the 911 call was made? What if I told you that Jessica had filed for a protective order just weeks before, but the courts hadn't processed it yet? And what if I told you that the only surviving witness that day was a child? This is where things get complicated, and heartbreaking, and deeply human. So settle in, keep your eyes on the screen, and don't skip ahead. Because every second you watch brings you closer to understanding the truth. To seeing how this man, who once cradled a baby in his arms, ended up behind bars, charged with the unthinkable. This isn't just about crime. This is about the cracks we ignore, the behaviors we excuse, the people we lose when we wait too long to speak up. And just when you think you've heard it all, there's a twist coming you won't see coming. But first, let's go back to the morning of Easter Sunday, 9:37 a.m., when Jessica posted her final Instagram story. What was in that video may be the key to everything. The morning of Easter Sunday was supposed to be one of peace. Jessica had planned everything down to the last detail, a calm, joyful day spent with her children, a day away from the complications that seemed to always follow her in the wake of her divorce from Brad. The holiday wasn't about Brad. It wasn't even about her new boyfriend, Jason, though she'd hoped in time he'd become a regular part of her life and Mia's. No, this day was about the kids, about giving them some sense of stability, of normalcy, after everything they had gone through. It had been 3 years since Jessica and Brad had separated, but the tension lingered. People said it was a clean break. Jessica had always maintained that it wasn't messy, that they had simply outgrown each other. But deep down, friends and family knew there had been more to it. Jessica, an open book in many ways, had always been quiet when it came to the last few months of their marriage. She'd shut down, kept to herself. Brad, on the other hand, never seemed to fully accept their split. He tried to remain part of the picture, often barging in on events like family dinners or birthday parties, like he couldn't let go of his role as the patriarch. But this wasn't about any of that, not really. Jessica was moving on, and that irked Brad. It gnawed him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had been pushed out of a life he felt was still his to control. In the weeks leading up to Easter, Jessica had tried to be civil. There were moments when she thought they could be friends, for the sake of Mia and her son with Brad, Noah. But those moments were fleeting, always tainted by Brad's insistence on maintaining a certain grip on her life. And when he started sending those texts, long, rambling ones where he professed his undying love for her, the kind that echoed of desperation, Jessica grew more and more wary. She started taking measures to protect herself. Small ones at first. Changing the locks. being careful not to leave her phone in places where he could get a hold of it. But it was the filing for a protective order that truly sent Brad over the edge. That's when the tension between them turned from passive-aggressive to something darker. Jessica had been speaking to a lawyer. It was only a matter of time before the courts processed her request. That was when Brad's paranoia, his possessiveness, became a dangerous cocktail. Jason had only been part of Jessica's life for about 9 months, but he'd already felt the heat of Brad's hostility. Every interaction with him was laced with veiled aggression, a quiet but palpable animosity. Jason didn't see it at first. He thought it was just Brad trying to adjust to the idea of someone else in Jessica's life. But after that Easter, Jason would know just how dangerous that kind of resentment could be. On the morning of April 20th, the day before Easter, Jessica and Jason spent the evening at her apartment after a long workday. They ordered takeout and talked about everything from weekend plans to their future together. Mia and Noah were out of sight in their rooms, playing or watching TV. It was a peaceful evening. Jessica felt lighter than she had in years. The weight of the past was slowly lifting, and Jason was part of that freedom. At least, that's how she saw it. But while Jessica was in her apartment, Brad was stewing in his own world, playing out a much darker narrative in his mind. That night, he drove around town, something he did often when the voices in his head wouldn't stop. His thoughts were a mix of jealousy and rage. He couldn't let go of the fact that Jessica had moved on, that she was happy with someone else. He kept thinking about the times he'd spent with Jessica, how they'd been a family, how they had built their lives together. Now, it all felt like a distant memory, something slipping out of his grasp. The next morning, Easter Sunday, started like any other Sunday. Jason left for work early, and Jessica had made plans for a small Easter egg hunt for Mia and Noah. They had breakfast together, their laughter echoing through the apartment. By 9 a.m., everything seemed perfect. But while Jessica and the kids were preoccupied with the day's festivities, Brad was making plans of his own. Brad knew where Jessica would be. He knew the time and place. He had no intention of showing up at the family celebration, at least not in person. His method of getting back at Jessica wasn't going to be through confrontation. It was going to be something far more insidious. He had a plan that involved manipulation. That's when he made the call. To anyone on the outside, it would have looked like a routine phone call. A call to check on the kids. But Jessica, caught up in the day's plans, didn't sense anything wrong. It wasn't until the phone rang a second time that she answered with a more abrupt tone. She was busy, trying to prepare the last of the eggs for the hunt. Mia and Noah were excited, running around the living room in their Easter outfits. But that second phone call was different. Brad wasn't asking about the kids or making idle small talk. Instead, he started demanding answers. "Why wasn't I invited?" he asked. "Why wasn't I included in the holiday? What kind of family excludes a father like this?" His voice was strained, like he was trying to hold back tears. Jessica knew this was his game. She had seen it before, his desperation masked as anger. But this time, something felt off. "I didn't think it would be appropriate," Jessica said softly, trying to keep the peace. "You know how it is with the kids. They need stability, Brad. It's just easier this way." But Brad wouldn't take that as an answer. The line went dead. Jessica tried to shake it off. She didn't have time to dwell on his emotional outbursts. She had a family to look after. But in that moment, something inside her clicked. Something told her she needed to watch her back. But it was too late. By the time the last egg was hidden in the garden, Brad had already started his final, irreversible steps toward violence. As the minutes ticked by, the situation seemed calm. Jason was expected back soon, and they would all sit down to a quiet Easter brunch. Nothing special, just a low-key family day. But as time passed, tension began to creep in, like a fog slowly enveloping the room. Jessica started checking her phone more often, waiting for a message from Jason. But she didn't know, not yet, that things were about to take a terrifying turn. At that moment, everything felt wrong. She didn't know why, but something told her she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Brad wasn't just angry.
He was planning something.
Something sinister. And the worst part? No one would see it coming. As Easter afternoon wore on, Jessica's sense of unease only deepened. She tried to shake it off, convincing herself it was just stress, the kind of nervous energy you get when you're trying to make everything perfect. The kids were laughing in the backyard, racing each other to find the last hidden egg. Jason was supposed to be back soon, and everything would settle into its usual rhythm. But something about the silence in the house felt off, like the calm before a storm. And then there it was. That one phone call. It came just as Jason pulled into the driveway, his car tires crunching on the gravel. Jessica glanced at her phone, saw the unknown number on the screen, and picked it up with a frown. For a moment, she hesitated. She had no reason to believe anything would be amiss, but the moment she pressed the phone to her ear, she felt an instinctual shiver run down her spine. It was a woman's voice, cool and calm, almost too calm. "Jessica, you don't know me, but I think you need to stop looking into Brad." The words hit Jessica like a ton of bricks. "Who is this?" she asked, trying to steady her breathing. "I can't give you my name," the voice continued, "but I know things about Brad. Things you don't want to uncover. Trust me, he's not what he seems. You're playing with fire." Jessica's mind raced. What was this person talking about? Who would know anything about Brad that she didn't? The voice wasn't threatening, exactly, but it carried an undercurrent of something darker. Someone who knew Brad, and knew him well enough to know the kind of trouble he could stir up. "I don't know what you're talking about," Jessica replied, trying to keep her tone neutral. He's my ex-husband. I'm just trying to protect my family." The voice didn't respond immediately, almost like it was waiting for her to take the bait. Then it came, low and deliberate. "You don't want to know the truth. Trust me. Walk away. Or you'll regret it." And with that, the call ended. Jessica was left standing there, phone still pressed to her ear, heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the blood rushing to her head, her mind spiraling. What had just happened? The message was clear. Someone was warning her. But who? And why now? She tried to push the strange conversation to the back of her mind. Jason had just stepped inside, and the kids were eager to sit down for lunch. It was supposed to be a normal Easter, the kind of day families look back on with fond memories. But the tension wouldn't let up, gnawing at her from the inside. Something wasn't right. As they sat down to eat, Jessica tried to act like everything was fine. Jason, ever the optimist, cracked a joke about the kids getting too much candy, and Mia and Noah giggled between bites of their Easter ham. But Jessica's mind was elsewhere. She couldn't shake the feeling that Brad was still out there, still watching, still planning something. It wasn't just the phone call. It was the way he had looked at her when they'd last spoken. The way he always seemed to think he was still a part of her life, still entitled to a seat at the table, even though he hadn't been invited. She could almost hear his voice in her head, demanding answers, asking why he wasn't part of their family anymore. And then, as if on cue, the phone rang again. This time, it was a message from the local police department. "Jessica, we need to speak with you about something. It's about Brad." Her heart skipped a beat.
What now?
When she arrived at the station, the officer who greeted her seemed unusually tense. He led her into a small, quiet room, away from the hustle and bustle of the main office. "Jessica," he started, his voice calm but tinged with something she couldn't place, "we've found something that we need to show you. It's about Brad." She sat down, her hands shaking. "What is it? What's happened?" The officer hesitated for a moment, glancing over his shoulder as though making sure no one was watching. "We went through Brad's car. It was parked in a remote area just outside town, near the old bridge. We found something there that might help us understand what happened the day of the murders." Jessica felt the blood drain from her face. A cold knot formed in the pit of her stomach. "What did you find?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "An old phone," the officer said, his eyes narrowing as if he were trying to gauge her reaction. "It was buried in the trunk, buried under a pile of old clothes and junk. We traced the number. Turns out it was registered to a woman named Natalie Jensen." The name sent a shockwave through Jessica. Natalie Jensen? She had never heard of her before, but the officer's expression told her this was no coincidence. "Who is she?" Jessica asked, her voice faltering. "We're still trying to piece that together," the officer said. "But this is where it gets interesting. We ran a search on her name, and she's been involved in several unsolved cases in this area. We don't know how Brad is connected to her, but she was last known to be in contact with him several months before the Easter incident. Something is off about her, Jessica. Jessica's mind raced. What was this woman's connection to Brad? Was she an ally? A secret lover? Had Brad been hiding something darker than she'd imagined? The questions started to pile up, each one more confusing than the last. Why was Brad's phone linked to someone like Natalie Jensen? And why hadn't the police told her about this before? But just as she was about to ask more questions, her phone buzzed again. It was a text message from Jason. Come home now. Something's wrong. Jessica's heart dropped. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew it wasn't good. When she arrived back at her apartment, she found Jason pacing in the living room, his face pale. Mia and Noah were in their rooms, silent, their eyes wide with confusion. Jason, what's going on? Jessica asked, her voice shaky. It's Brad, Jason said, his words barely making it out. There's something wrong. He's been watching us. Before Jessica could process what he was saying, Jason handed her his phone. The screen displayed a series of photos. Photos of Jessica's apartment taken from across the street, pictures of her and the kids during their Easter egg hunt. Someone's been watching us for weeks, Jason said, his voice tight with panic. The weight of the situation hit Jessica all at once. She had been warned. She had been told to stop looking. But now, she realized the truth. It wasn't just Brad she needed to worry about. It was someone or something much darker. And that's when it hit her. Maybe the warning wasn't from someone trying to protect her from Brad. Maybe it was someone who wanted to keep her from uncovering a truth far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Who was pulling the strings, and why? What was Brad really hiding? And how far was Jessica willing to go to uncover the answers? The pieces were starting to fall into place, but just as quickly as they aligned, new questions emerged, questions that would only escalate the mystery and plunge Jessica deeper into a web of deceit, betrayal, and hidden truths. Was Brad the real killer? Or was there someone else behind it all? And would Jessica uncover the truth before it was too late? As Jessica stood frozen in her apartment, the weight of everything crashing down around her, she couldn't shake the thought that there was something bigger going on. Something she was missing. The photos Jason had shown her, those chilling images of her family, taken without their knowledge, seemed to taunt her, making her feel exposed and vulnerable. Whoever was behind this wasn't just watching from the shadows. They were planning, manipulating, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But as the hours ticked by, Jessica couldn't afford to focus solely on Brad. No, something about that strange phone call from earlier still gnawed at her. Whoever had warned her to stop digging had known far too much. And now, it felt like she was in the middle of something far darker than she could have ever imagined. As Jessica sat on the couch, trying to steady her racing thoughts, her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Jason or an unknown number. It was from her sister, Emily, who lived just across town. Emily was usually the calm one, the one who always knew what to do in situations like this. But when Jessica saw the urgency in the text, she felt a cold knot tighten in her chest. "Call me now," Emily's message read. "It's about Brad." Jessica immediately dialed her sister's number, the ringing echoing through the empty room. When Emily picked up, her voice was shaking, strained, almost like she'd been crying. "Jess," she said quickly, "I need you to listen to me. Something's happening, and I don't know what to think anymore." Jessica's heart raced. "What's going on? What happened?" Emily's voice dropped to a whisper, as if she were afraid someone might hear. "I got a call. Just like you did. But this one, it was different. The person on the other end said they were watching me. That they knew everything about me, everything about our family. They even knew about the time the time we went to that cabin up north. They said I needed to stop asking questions. That I should back off." Jessica's breath caught in her throat. "Emily, you need to tell me exactly what they said. Who was it? What did they want?" Emily hesitated, her voice trembling. "I don't know, Jess. It didn't feel like Brad. But it was someone who knew way too much. They even mentioned things I haven't told anyone, like the time we covered up that incident with Dad. I don't know how they knew about that, but it felt like they were using it against me. Jessica's mind spun. The incident Emily was referring to had happened years ago, a dark secret buried deep in their family's history. It was the kind of thing that, if ever revealed, would tear everything apart. The kind of thing that could destroy relationships, reputations, and even lives. The fact that someone outside of their immediate circle knew about it sent an ice-cold shiver through Jessica's spine. "Emily, listen to me," Jessica said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You need to stay calm. Don't let anyone know you're talking to me about this. And you definitely can't trust whoever this is. They're trying to mess with our heads." "But Jess, this doesn't make sense," Emily interrupted, her voice rising in panic. "This isn't just about Brad. Whoever's behind this knows things that should have been forgotten." Jessica's mind was racing now, piecing together the fragments of the conversation, trying to understand how everything was connected. Brad's strange behavior, the mysterious phone call, Emily's warning. Nothing was adding up. And now, the past was resurfacing, threatening to expose something that had been buried for far too long. But what did this secret have to do with Brad? And who else was involved? As Jessica tried to make sense of it all, she felt a sudden, overwhelming need to talk to Jason. She needed him to help her figure this out, to make sense of the connections that were starting to form in her mind. But when she turned to reach for her phone, she froze. The room, which had felt so empty just moments ago, now felt suffocating. The air was thick with tension. Jason had been acting strangely since the phone call, but now, as she stood there, she realized that she hadn't heard from him in over an hour. She'd texted him multiple times, and each time, the message had gone unanswered. Her heart began to race as she checked the time. Just over an hour had passed since he'd left the apartment to grab something from his car. Something about his sudden departure didn't sit right with her. Why had he left so abruptly? And why hadn't he come back yet? Her phone buzzed again, interrupting her thoughts. This time, it was a notification from the local news app. Jessica clicked it, her stomach tightening as the headline flashed across the screen. "Local man found dead near abandoned bridge. Possible connection to recent murders." She felt her blood run cold as she read the article. The body found near the bridge was identified as Jason's ex-coworker, Lucas Garner, a name she had heard Jason mention only a few weeks ago. Lucas had been the one to originally reach out to Jason, warning him about something he had seen involving Brad. It had seemed like an odd conversation at the time, but now, with Lucas's body found in a remote area just outside town, Jessica began to wonder if the warnings were more than just paranoia. What had Lucas seen? What had Jason known? The more Jessica thought about it, the more the pieces of the puzzle shifted and slid out of place. It was as if she was trying to assemble a picture with missing pieces, each turn bringing more confusion than clarity. She wanted to call Jason, demand answers, but she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Was he involved in something she didn't know about? Had he been hiding things from her just as Brad had hidden things from her? Just as Jessica was about to dial Jason's number, the doorbell rang. Her heart stopped in her chest. Who could it be at this hour? She cautiously walked toward the door, her mind racing with the possibilities. When she opened it, there was no one there, just a small, folded piece of paper lying on the doorstep. Her hand shook as she picked it up, unfolded it, and read the words scribbled in bold, black ink. "You're getting too close. Stop now, or you'll lose everything." Her breath caught in her throat. It was the same warning she'd heard before, but now it was written. And someone had been watching her, waiting for the right moment to send this message. The threat wasn't just against her, it was against her entire world. Jessica knew that this wasn't just about Brad anymore. This was about something much bigger. And as the door creaked shut behind her, she realized the truth. She was in deeper than she'd ever imagined, and there was no turning back now. What was Jason hiding? Who had sent the note? And why had the warning been repeated? The mystery was far from over, and the stakes had just been raised. The tension in the air felt suffocating as Jessica stood at the door, staring at the cryptic note in her hand. She could still feel the weight of it, as if the words themselves were suffocating her, pulling her deeper into something she couldn't understand. Her heart was racing, her breath shallow, as her mind reeled with one terrifying thought. Whoever had sent this note was not just playing games. They were watching her. Every step, every move. And the stakes were higher now, more dangerous than ever. She turned the note over, hoping there would be some clue she missed, but the back was blank, nothing more than a cold, hard surface staring back at her. The silence of the apartment was overwhelming. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of birds chirping outside, it all felt too quiet, too peaceful, as if the calm before a storm that was building, and she was helpless to stop it. A chill ran down her spine as she suddenly realized Jason still hadn't come back. Her phone had been silent for far too long. She tried calling him again, but once again it went straight to voicemail. She checked her messages, scrolled through the texts he had sent earlier, but there was nothing that explained his sudden absence. No warning, no explanation, just emptiness. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual, each second stretching into eternity. Jessica paced around the apartment, unable to settle, her nerves on edge. What was going on? She had to know where Jason was. She had to find him. But as she moved from room to room, her anxiety spiking with each passing minute, something caught her eye through the window. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. Across the street, standing near the corner of the alley, was a figure, someone watching her apartment. The streetlights bathed the figure in an eerie yellow glow, casting long shadows that distorted the shape. It wasn't enough to see their face, but Jessica could feel the intensity of their gaze. The person was looking directly at her, unmoving. Her pulse hammered in her ears. This wasn't the first time she had felt someone was watching her, but now it was undeniable. This was real. Her gut twisted with fear, and the instinct to hide, to protect herself, hit her like a wave. But she couldn't run, not now. She had to find out who it was and what they wanted. Forcing herself to look away, she grabbed her phone and tried Jason again. Nothing. It was as if he had completely vanished off the face of the earth. She thought about calling the police, but what could she say? How could she explain that she was being watched by an unknown figure, that Jason was missing, and that she had no idea why? The weight of her isolation settled on her shoulders, a burden too heavy to carry alone. Then, as if the universe was mocking her, the doorbell rang again. The sound sliced through the silence, sharp and sudden. Jessica's breath hitched, her heart pounding in her chest as she slowly moved toward the door. It wasn't a knock, not the usual knock she'd hear when someone was visiting. No, this was something deliberate, something that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. The person at the door knew she was there. She hesitated, every instinct telling her to run, to hide, but she couldn't just ignore it.
She was too far gone for that.
She couldn't turn back now. With a deep breath, she opened the door, only to find nothing there, no one standing on the other side. Her eyes scanned the surroundings, her pulse racing, but there was nothing. Nothing except the faint rustle of wind and the hum of the streetlights. Just when she was about to close the door, something caught her eye, a dark shape on the doorstep. A small, black envelope. Her heart sank as she bent down to pick it up, the same overwhelming sense of dread coursing through her veins. She ripped it open, her fingers trembling as she unfolded the single piece of paper inside. This time, the words were scrawled in jagged handwriting, the ink smeared as though written in a hurry. "You're not safe. We're watching you. Stop searching, or you won't see tomorrow." A shudder ran through Jessica's body. The words felt like a death sentence, cold and final. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, her world narrowing to just those chilling letters on the page. Whoever had sent this message wasn't just threatening her, they were promising something far worse. The implications hit her like a freight train. If she didn't stop, if she didn't back off, there would be no turning back. But what could she do? Who could she trust? In a panic, she dialed Jason's number again, desperately hoping for some sign that he was okay, that he was out there, that everything wasn't spiraling out of control. But the phone rang, and she heard that all too familiar voicemail message again. "I'm sorry, but the person you're trying to reach." Jessica couldn't listen anymore. The uncertainty, the dread, was unbearable. Her thoughts were spiraling. She couldn't keep going like this. She couldn't be in this state of terror forever. And then, as if the universe had decided to kick her when she was already down, her phone screen lit up with a new notification. It was a message. This one wasn't from Jason, but from a random, anonymous account. No name, no picture, just a string of numbers. Curious but terrified, Jessica opened the message. The text inside was brief, but it was enough to make her blood run cold. "Your sister is next." She dropped the phone in shock, her entire body trembling. Her breath caught in her throat as she turned to the window, scanning the street for any sign of movement. Was Emily in danger too? Had they already targeted her sister? Was this all part of some twisted game? Or worse, was Emily's fate already sealed? She needed to act fast. She needed to get out to find Emily, to figure out what was happening. But as Jessica grabbed her jacket and rushed for the door, the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. Someone was inside the apartment. Someone was here. Jessica froze, terror freezing her to the spot. She turned slowly, every muscle in her body screaming for her to move, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. She was trapped. And that was when she heard the voice, low, almost a whisper, but unmistakable in its malice. "Did you really think you could escape?" The figure stepped into the doorway, their face hidden in shadow, the voice growing colder, more familiar. It was a voice she had heard before. A voice that had haunted her every step. It was Brad. Brad's cold, chilling voice echoed through the apartment, sending a wave of dread crashing over Jessica's entire body. She stood frozen, her mind racing, trying to process the nightmare unfolding in front of her. Brad was here, alive, standing in her doorway, and the world she thought she understood was slipping out of her grasp. Everything she had believed, every piece of evidence she thought she'd uncovered, suddenly felt like an illusion, shattered in an instant. The note, the warnings, the cryptic messages, they all pointed to Brad being involved in something dark, but now he was here, speaking to her as though nothing had changed. "You've been digging, Jessica," he said softly, his eyes narrowing. "And now you've found more than you bargained for." Her heart pounded as she took a step back, her mind spinning with a million questions. She had spent so long trying to piece together the puzzle, trying to figure out who was behind the threats, who was watching her every move, and why it all pointed to Brad. But now, standing in front of her, his face revealed nothing but calm indifference, as if this were all part of some twisted game he was playing. Her voice barely rose above a whisper as she stammered, "What do you want from me, Brad? What are you trying to do?" Brad took a slow step forward, the weight of his presence filling the small room. "You still don't get it, do you?" he murmured, his voice now thick with something darker. "You think you've been investigating me, that you've found the answers, but you're blind to what's really going on. You've been following the wrong trail this whole time." Jessica's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" she asked, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Brad's lips curled into a sinister smile. "It's not me you should be worried about. It's not even the past you're trying to dig up. It's the future. What's coming? And you've been too distracted to see it. You've been focused on the wrong person." The room seemed to close in on her, suffocating her, as Brad's words settled into her mind. She tried to make sense of them, but the more she thought about it, the less she understood. If Brad wasn't behind everything, if he wasn't the threat, then who was? Who had been pulling the strings, orchestrating all the chaos in her life? And what did he mean by the future? "Stop playing games," Jessica spat, her fear transforming into frustration. "What the hell is going on?" Brad took another step toward her, his face now just inches from hers, his cold breath sending shivers down her spine. "You need to listen to me," he whispered, his voice low and dangerous. "You've been looking for answers in all the wrong places. The truth is much darker than you could ever imagine, and it's closer to you than you realize." Suddenly, it all clicked. The nagging feeling Jessica had been trying to shake, the suspicion that had been bubbling just beneath the surface, snapped into focus. Jason's odd behavior, his sudden disappearance, the way he'd been acting so strangely before he vanished, it all made sense now. Brad wasn't the real threat. Jason was. He had been manipulating her from the very beginning. She had been so consumed with her own fears and doubts that she had failed to see the truth right in front of her. But before she could confront Brad with her newfound realization, her phone buzzed again, its screen lighting up with an unfamiliar number. She snatched it from the table, her hands trembling as she answered it without thinking. "Hello?" she asked, her voice shaky with anxiety. A cold, unfamiliar voice greeted her on the other end. "It's time to stop, Jessica. You've gotten too close to the truth." Jessica's heart skipped a beat. The voice sounded like someone she had never heard before, but it was familiar in a way that sent a wave of dread through her. "Who is this?" she demanded, her grip tightening on the phone. The voice didn't answer directly. Instead, it said something that sent Jessica's mind spiraling. "You think Brad's the one you should be worried about? Think again. The person you trust the most is the one you should fear." The line went dead. Jessica's breath came in short, panicked gasps as she stared at the phone, her thoughts racing. The weight of the words hung heavily in the air, suffocating her. Her mind immediately went to Jason. She thought back to all their conversations, the small moments when something felt off, when he seemed too calm, too distant. But could he really be the one behind all of this? Could Jason have been orchestrating this twisted game from the very start? Brad's voice broke through her thoughts. "You see it now, don't you?" he asked, his eyes watching her closely. "You've been played, Jessica. And now it's too late." The truth she had been searching for was right there in front of her, slipping away like sand through her fingers. Jason, the man she had trusted, the one she thought she could count on, had been manipulating her every step of the way. He was the one behind everything. He had been the puppet master, pulling the strings, setting everything into motion. And now, Jessica realized she had been his pawn all along. But just as the realization hit her, the door to her apartment suddenly burst open, and Jessica's world came crashing down even further. The person who entered was someone she never expected, someone who had been standing in the shadows all along, watching, waiting. It was Emily. Her sister stood in the doorway, eyes wide with fear, her breath ragged. "Jess," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry. I didn't know how to tell you, but Jason, he's not who you think he is." The room seemed to spin around Jessica as the truth hit her like a tidal wave. Jason wasn't the person she thought he was. Neither was Brad. And Emily had known something all along. But what had she been hiding? What had she been keeping from her? Jessica could barely speak, her voice a hoarse whisper as she turned to her sister. "What do you mean?" she asked, the words barely escaping her lips. Emily's face twisted in anguish as she stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. "I didn't want to hurt you, Jess. But you need to know the truth. Jason, he's not just involved in this. He's been working with them all along. The people behind everything. He's been playing both of us." The air was thick with tension, every word hanging like a heavy weight between them. The truth was slipping through Jessica's fingers, and now, it seemed like the whole world had been allied. Jessica's mind raced as Emily's words sank in, each one a sharp stab to her chest. Jason, the man she had loved, trusted, and built her life around, was involved in everything. But what did that mean? Had he been lying to her all along? How could someone so close, someone she thought she knew, be a part of something so sinister? She looked at her sister, but there was no comfort in Emily's eyes, only fear and guilt. Her sister's presence, once a source of solace, now felt like a cold reminder of how deeply embedded the lies had become. "Why didn't you tell me?" Jessica finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper, the hurt seeping into every word. The weight of the question felt unbearable, and yet, it was the only thing she could ask. Her heart ached with the sudden realization that everything she had known, the life she had built, the people she trusted, was all a facade. Emily shifted uncomfortably, her eyes avoiding Jessica's gaze as she struggled to find the right words. "I didn't know how," Emily murmured, her voice cracking under the strain. "I didn't know how to tell you what I found out. I thought maybe if I kept quiet, it wouldn't get worse." Jessica's stomach twisted in knots, anger boiling up from the depths of her chest. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her sister had been hiding the truth from her, and in doing so, she had put her in more danger than she could have ever imagined. "How long have you known?" Jessica asked, her breath shaky as the weight of her sister's betrayal crashed down on her. "Not long," Emily replied, her eyes welling up with tears. "Just a few weeks. But I didn't know who to trust. And I thought maybe I could handle it on my own. But then it got out of control." Jessica's heart clenched. She could see the fear in Emily's eyes now, the same fear that she felt deep within her own chest. This wasn't just about betrayal, it was about survival. Jessica's mind spiraled as she tried to process everything. Jason, Brad, the cryptic messages, the disappearance of people she cared about. Everything was connected. The question wasn't just what they had done, but why. What was the endgame? What were they trying to accomplish? And why did it all have to involve her? "Emily," Jessica began, but before she could continue, the phone rang, its shrill sound breaking the heavy silence between them. Both sisters froze, their eyes locking in a shared moment of panic. Jessica's heart pounded in her chest, her fingers trembling as she reached for the phone. It was an unknown number, and she knew, deep down, that this call would change everything. She hesitated, but Emily urged her silently with a glance, her face pale. Taking a deep breath, Jessica answered the call. "Hello." The voice on the other end was calm, too calm, and yet it carried an unmistakable edge of menace. "You've come too far, Jessica. You've learned too much. And now, it's time to make a choice." Jessica's pulse quickened. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice shaking. The voice continued, unbothered by her tone. "You can keep digging, keep looking for answers. But understand this, if you do, your sister will pay the price. If you want to keep her safe, if you want to protect her, you'll stop now. Walk away. Leave everything behind. Or if you think the truth is worth it, if you think exposing everything will make you feel better, then be prepared to lose everything. That's the choice you face, Jessica. Your safety, or the truth." A sickening chill ran through Jessica's body as the words sunk in. She glanced at Emily, who was now visibly shaking, her eyes wide with fear. "Don't listen to them," Emily whispered, but Jessica could barely hear her over the pounding in her ears. The ultimatum hung heavy in the air, pressing down on her chest like a vice. For a moment, Jessica felt paralyzed. She had come so far, uncovered so many pieces of the puzzle. And now, when the truth was within her grasp, she was being asked to choose between the truth and her sister's life. Could she really walk away? Could she let everything slide, knowing that there were people out there pulling strings, manipulating her and everyone she loved? Or could she stand her ground, confront the darkness, and expose it, knowing the price might be too high to pay? Tears filled her eyes as she looked at Emily. The one person who had always been there, the one person she'd believed she could rely on, was now caught in the middle of a nightmare that Jessica couldn't even begin to understand. The pain in her chest threatened to choke her, a mix of guilt, fear, and anger. She could feel her mind racing, but no clear answer came. There was no right choice here. Either way, she would lose. Either way, she would destroy something precious to her. The voice on the other end of the line interrupted her thoughts. "Time's running out, Jessica. The clock is ticking. What's it going to be? Truth or safety?" The question echoed in her mind, gnawing at her, pulling her in two directions. She didn't know how much time she had left before the people behind this would strike. But she also knew that this wasn't just about Emily's safety. It was about the lives of others, the people who had been affected by the chaos that Jason, Brad, and whoever else was involved had caused. It was about stopping something far bigger than herself. But could she do that without destroying everything she cared about? Could she truly expose the truth without losing herself and everyone she loved in the process? "Jessica," Emily whispered again, her voice breaking. "Please don't make the wrong choice." For a moment, everything stood still. Jessica's hand shook as she held the phone to her ear, her heart torn between her desire to end the nightmare and the fear of losing her sister. She didn't know what to do, didn't know who she could trust anymore. Every person, every connection, felt like a potential lie. Every decision felt like a step into the unknown, and the fear of what was coming next gripped her like a vice. The silence stretched on, unbearable. And then, just as Jessica opened her mouth to respond, a loud bang sounded from outside the apartment. The windows rattled. The door shook in its frame. Someone was here, and Jessica's world, already teetering on the edge of collapse, seemed to shatter completely. The voice on the phone didn't wait for her to answer. "Make your choice, Jessica. It's too late to turn back now." Jessica's heart was pounding so violently in her chest that she could barely breathe. The loud bang from outside the apartment still rang in her ears, and for a moment, she thought she might pass out from the sheer terror that gripped her. She glanced at Emily, whose face was pale, eyes wide with fear, and then back at the door, unsure of whether to run or confront whoever had just shaken the entire building. But before she could make a decision, another, much softer noise, a subtle creak of the floorboards behind her, sent a wave of ice through her veins. She spun around, her breath catching in her throat, but the sight that greeted her wasn't what she expected. Standing in the doorway, his face barely illuminated by the dim light from a hallway, was Jason. The man she had trusted, the one who had been her everything, her confidant, her partner, was standing there, a cold, unreadable expression on his face. Her mind screamed in disbelief. How had he gotten here? She thought he had been gone, that he was in hiding, or worse, dead. But here he was, as though he had never left, as if nothing had changed. "Jason," she whispered, almost as if saying his name would somehow make sense of the madness. But the look in his eyes told her that nothing made sense anymore. His gaze flickered to Emily, and then back to Jessica, a cold smirk playing at the corners of his lips. "I knew you'd find out eventually," he said, his voice flat, emotionless. "But I didn't expect it to be like this." Jessica felt her knees weaken, her entire body threatening to give out beneath her. "What the hell is going on?" she demanded, the words tumbling out of her mouth before she could stop them. "Why are you here? Why did you leave me in the dark?" She took a step forward, her fists clenched at her sides, but Jason didn't flinch. Instead, his gaze hardened, the mask of indifference slipping away to reveal something far darker. "You really don't get it, do you?" he replied, his tone suddenly venomous. "It was never about you, Jessica. It never was." The words hit her like a physical blow. Her mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle, but every answer she thought she had was slipping further and further out of reach. "What do you mean? Everything we've been through, everything we've been trying to fix, it was all a lie." Jason's eyes narrowed as he stepped further into the room, the weight of his presence pushing her back, making her feel small and powerless. "You're just a pawn, Jessica. Just like your sister. Just like everyone else. And now that you know too much, you've outlived your usefulness." A chill spread through her chest as the words sank in. Jason wasn't just a bystander. He wasn't just involved. He was the architect of it all. The entire web of lies, the conspiracy that had turned her life upside down, had been orchestrated by him from the start. Everything she had thought she understood, her past, her relationships, her future, had been manipulated. She had been living in a nightmare, and the man she had trusted most had been the one pulling the strings the entire time. "Who else is involved, Jason?" Jessica's voice was hoarse as she spoke, her heart pounding in her throat. "Who are you working for?"
What is this really about?
Jason let out a low, humorless laugh. "You really think you're in control of the situation, don't you? You've got it all wrong. The truth isn't something you're going to find. It's something that's been buried for years, and you, Jessica, were never meant to uncover it." Before she could react, there was another loud bang from the hallway, followed by the sound of footsteps approaching quickly. Jessica's blood ran cold. It wasn't just Jason who was here. It wasn't just the two of them anymore. The entire network that had been operating in the shadows, pulling the strings, was closing in on her. And now she realized she was trapped. There was no way out. As the footsteps grew louder, Jason's expression darkened, and for the first time, Jessica saw a flicker of something, regret, maybe, or fear, pass across his face. He took a step closer to her, his voice low. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into. This isn't just about you or me. This is bigger than you can imagine. There are people who will stop at nothing to protect the secret. Jessica's mind was racing, but it was all too much. The walls felt like they were closing in on her, and every second that passed seemed to make the situation more impossible to escape. She could feel Emily's eyes on her, but Jessica couldn't take her focus off Jason. She had trusted him. She had built her life around him. And now, all of it was falling apart, piece by piece. Before she could process what was happening, the door flew open with a force that made her jump. In stepped another man, tall, imposing, with a cold, calculating look in his eyes. His presence was enough to make the entire room feel suffocating. He didn't need to say a word. His posture, his expression said everything. This was the person Jason had been working for, the one who controlled everything from behind the scenes. And now, Jessica was face to face with him, with the mastermind of her worst nightmare. Jason took a step back, his eyes flicking to the new arrival. We need to end this now. It's too late for her to walk away, he said, his voice carrying an edge of desperation. The man didn't respond. Instead, he turned his cold gaze on Jessica. You've made a dangerous mistake, Jessica. But we can still fix this, he said, his voice like gravel. All you have to do is walk away. Stop asking questions. And we'll let you live. You'll never have to know the full truth. We can make it all go away. But if you don't, if you keep pushing, if you keep digging, then you're going to regret it. Jessica's heart skipped a beat. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in even tighter. She realized with a sickening clarity that there was no way out. They had already decided her fate. The decision had been made, and the stakes were higher than she could have ever imagined. She looked at Emily, her thoughts swirling in a blur of confusion, fear, and anger. How could she possibly walk away now? How could she turn her back on everything? But if she didn't stop now, then she would lose everything, her life, her sister, everything she had ever cared about. There was no right answer, no safe choice. There was only one thing she knew for sure. The clock was ticking, and she didn't have much time left. The air in the apartment felt heavy, suffocating, as Jessica stood facing the man who had orchestrated her entire nightmare. The room seemed to shrink around her, the walls pressing in with every breath she took. Jason stood by the door, his eyes still cold, his lips barely moving as he watched the scene unfold. The man across from her, the one who had silently controlled the chaos in her life from the shadows, took a step closer, his eyes narrowing as he assessed her. Jessica could feel her heart racing, the frantic beat pounding in her ears, drowning out the sound of her own thoughts. She had never been so terrified in her life. Every instinct told her to run, to escape, but she knew it was too late. The web had been spun, and now it was too tangled for her to break free. She had come so far, uncovered so many pieces of the puzzle, only to realize that the truth was far darker than she could have imagined. The last shred of hope that maybe she could find a way out was slipping through her fingers, and she could feel the weight of that reality crashing down on her. You should have walked away when you had the chance, the man said, his voice low, almost taunting. You never understood what you were dealing with, did you? You thought you could find the answers, uncover the truth. But some truths are better left buried. Jessica's blood ran cold as his words settled in her mind. The pieces that had been so elusive, so confusing, were finally coming together in a way that was more terrifying than anything she had imagined. She had thought Jason was just another pawn, just another piece of the puzzle she needed to solve. But now she saw the bigger picture, and it was far more insidious than she could have ever expected. Jason hadn't just been involved. He had been the one pulling the strings from the start. And this man in front of her, the one who now towered over her with his cold, calculating gaze, had been the one controlling it all from behind the scenes. You were never supposed to find out, the man continued, his voice chillingly calm. You and your sister, just collateral damage. The truth was never meant for you. But now you've made it personal. Jessica could feel her knees start to give way beneath her, the sheer weight of the situation threatening to collapse her. The terror, the anger, the helplessness. Everything was crashing down on her at once. But then, in the pit of her stomach, something shifted. A spark of defiance, a flicker of the woman she used to be, rose up inside her. She couldn't let this man win. She couldn't let them destroy everything she had left. "Tell me why," she said, her voice shaking but fierce. "Why did you do all of this? What do you want from me? Why me?" The man's lips curled into a smile, the expression almost sinister in its cruelty. "You think this is about you, Jessica? You think this is personal? No, this is bigger than you, bigger than any of us. This is about control, about power, about making sure the truth stays buried for good." He paused, his gaze darkening. "And now you're too close. You've uncovered too much. You've seen what we didn't want you to see." Jessica's mind raced, trying to piece together the words, trying to make sense of everything. Her thoughts were jumbled, but one thing stood out. "You didn't just come for me," she said, the realization hitting her like a tidal wave. "You came for my sister. For everyone involved. You're trying to cover something up. Something huge."
But why?
"What's the truth you're trying to hide?" The man's smile faltered, just for a moment. But that was enough. That crack in his composure was all she needed. The truth was there, hidden just beneath the surface, waiting to be exposed. And in that moment, she knew that everything she had fought for, every second of fear, every piece of evidence she had uncovered, had led her to this point. She had to find the final piece of the puzzle. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from the hallway, followed by the sound of running footsteps. Jessica's heart skipped a beat, and before she could process what was happening, the door slammed open again. But this time it wasn't Jason who stepped through, it was Emily. Her sister, eyes wide with panic, holding something in her hand. "Jessica!" Emily shouted, rushing toward her. "I found it! The last piece of the puzzle. It's all here." Before anyone could react, Emily thrust the object into Jessica's hands. It was a file, thick, bulging with pages, and sealed with a red stamp that read "Confidential." Her hands shook as she tore it open, her eyes scanning the contents. And then, everything clicked. The file contained names, dates, and records, details of illegal transactions, hidden accounts, and politicians who had been involved in some of the most dangerous and covert operations the country had ever seen. It wasn't just about Jason and the man standing in front of her. It was about a conspiracy that spanned decades, a network of corrupt individuals in high places who had been pulling the strings all along. "This is it," Jessica whispered, the weight of the truth crashing down on her like a tidal wave. "This is what you've been hiding." The man's eyes widened for a fraction of a second, but it was enough for Jessica to see the panic creeping into his expression. He reached for something in his pocket, but before he could pull it out, Emily stepped forward, her hand held high in the air, holding up her phone. "I've already sent it to the authorities," Emily said, her voice steady, despite the fear in her eyes. "The truth is out there now. You can't stop it." The man froze, his face draining of color as he realized his hold on the situation was slipping away. For a moment, it felt like time itself had stopped. The weight of the truth hung in the air, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Jessica saw a glimmer of hope. But then, just as quickly, that hope was dashed. The man's eyes narrowed, and without warning, he lunged forward, his hand shooting out to grab Emily. Jessica screamed, but it was too late. In an instant, the man had her sister pinned against the wall, his hand wrapped around her throat. "You think you've won?" he hissed. "You think you've exposed everything? You have no idea what you're up against." Jessica's heart was in her throat as she rushed forward, adrenaline flooding her veins. This wasn't over.
Not yet.
She grabbed the first thing she could find, a heavy lamp, and swung it at the man with all the strength she had left. The lamp collided with his head with a sickening crack, and he crumpled to the ground, releasing Emily in the process. But before Jessica could even process what had happened, another shot rang out, sharp, sudden, and deafening. Jessica turned, her heart freezing as she saw Jason standing in the doorway, the gun in his hand trained directly at her. "I didn't want it to end like this," he said, his voice filled with regret. But his eyes told a different story, cold, ruthless, and unfeeling. Before she could react, there was a loud crash from behind him, and a group of armed officers stormed in, weapons drawn, taking Jason down in seconds. Jessica's legs gave way as the weight of it all hit her. The fight was over. The truth had been exposed, and it was finally over. But as she looked at the wreckage of her life, the betrayal, the loss, the lies, she couldn't shake the feeling that something darker still lurked beneath the surface. Something that hadn't been uncovered yet. And in that moment, she realized the truth wasn't just a weapon. It was a curse. Jessica sat alone in the sterile, fluorescent-lit room, the hum of the overhead lights the only sound breaking the oppressive silence. The weight of the past weeks pressed down on her, each moment replaying in her mind like a broken record. She had uncovered the conspiracy, exposed the lies, and yet, the victory felt hollow. The authorities had arrested Jason, the man who had once been her everything, and the shadowy figures who had lurked in the background were now in custody. But the relief she had anticipated never came. Instead, a gnawing emptiness settled in her chest. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her reverie. The screen displayed a message from Emily. "I'm sorry, Jess. I had to leave. I couldn't stay." The words were simple, but they cut deeper than any betrayal. Emily, her sister, her last remaining family, had disappeared without a trace. No explanation, no warning. Just gone. Jessica's mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle. Had Emily been involved in the conspiracy all along? Had she known more than she had let on? The questions swirled, each one more painful than the last. She had always believed that uncovering the truth would bring closure, but now she realized that some truths only lead to more questions. Determined to find answers, Jessica delved deeper into the files Emily had left behind. Hidden among the stacks of documents was a name she hadn't seen before: Dr. Henry Caldwell. The name was unfamiliar, but the connection to the conspiracy was undeniable. Caldwell was a renowned neuroscientist whose research had been funded by the very people Jessica had exposed. But why had Emily been in contact with him? What role did he play in all of this? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. She opened it to find a man standing there, holding a package. "For you," he said, handing it over before turning and walking away without another word. The package was unmarked, the brown paper wrapping plain and nondescript. Inside, she found a single photograph: Emily, standing in front of a building she recognized as the old psychiatric hospital on the outskirts of town. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. Emily had been there. She had been involved in something much darker than Jessica had ever imagined. The conspiracy wasn't just about corruption and power. It was about control, manipulation, and the erasure of memories. The hospital had been conducting illegal experiments on patients, erasing their memories and replacing them with false ones. And Emily had been a part of it.
But why?
What had driven her sister to participate in such horrors? The answers eluded Jessica, slipping further out of reach the harder she tried to grasp them. She was left with more questions than answers, each one more disturbing than the last. As she sat there, the weight of the truth pressing down on her, her phone buzzed again. Another message from Emily. "They're coming for you. Don't trust anyone." The words were cryptic, but the urgency was clear. Jessica had to act, and she had to act fast. She gathered the files, the photograph, and the message, and left the room, her mind set on finding Emily and uncovering the full extent of the conspiracy. But as she stepped into the hallway, she was met by a figure she hadn't expected: Dr. Henry Caldwell. "Looking for answers?" he asked, his voice calm, almost amused. "You're too late. The game is over." Before she could respond, he stepped aside, revealing a door behind him. The door to the psychiatric hospital. The door to the truth. Jessica's heart raced as she stepped forward, her hand trembling as she reached for the handle. She didn't know what awaited her on the other side, but she knew she had to face it. For Emily. For herself. For the truth. As she opened the door, the world around her shifted, the walls closing in, the air thick with the scent of antiseptic and decay. She stepped inside, the door slamming shut behind her, and the darkness enveloped her. And then nothing.